are back. You're listening to You Would Think, the Philadelphia Flyers podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Collington. Joining me today, it's a little bit of different, a little bit of the same. Mike Giletto Sr. starting off.
How's everybody doing? Hopefully everybody's very, very well and staying healthy.
We hope so too. And also joining us today, it's our other best friend here, Mr. Kevin Durso.
What's going on, everybody?
Yeah, it's weird. We should be coming down the stretch. A couple games left, coming towards the playoffs, trying to figure out if we're hosting our first round series. Hey, maybe we're winning the division the way things are going. Instead, we're sitting here. There hasn't been a game in 2.5 weeks. I've been watching highlights. I started hitting highlights real hard this weekend. And this whole quarantine thing is starting to kick in. What have you gentlemen been up to in terms of staving off the boredom? Kevin, we'll start with you.
Pretty much likewise. I mean, I don't feel like this is something different for me when it comes to watching the highlights. I feel like I was doing that. I'd fall down the YouTube hole anyway, no matter what.
That's fair.
You have an excuse even more to not pay attention to what's going on in the outside world for a little bit if you can distract yourself with these previous highlights, these great highlights that we can find on YouTube as they are gloriously out there for everybody to see. So I've been doing that as well. I've seen a lot of stuff about some previous playoff series. I'm going to start to get the writing juices flowing again with some stuff on that probably soon because there hasn't been a whole lot to talk about. But, I think the fact that there's a lot of good previous playoff series that we can reference to against divisional teams that the Flyers are all competing with at the moment, with where the season left off is a good place to go and revisit those old series. So that's where my mind kind of is. But otherwise, missing having anything to distract me. The sports are a distraction from all this other stuff, and it's just that part sucks. That part absolutely sucks. But otherwise, just busy trying to maintain life as best as possible.
Yeah, we're here. Sports are escapism, and we are by extension also escapism. And even if sports have stopped, we're here to continue entertaining you. But Senior, what have you been up to during your work from home phase of life?
I would say probably the most productive thing I've accomplished in the last 2 weeks is I can figure out exactly where in the backyard I'm going to bury her if this goes much longer.
Oh man. I don't think she's a listener, is she?
No, she's definitely not a listener. Oh, and she would totally understand because she picked out the plot for me too. Don't worry about it.
Well, at least the feeling is mutual.
Yes, I don't mean to imply for a second that I'm not just as big an ass as as everyone can hear I am as we go forward with every show.
No, we've seen some of that on Twitter this week, and we'll get into that as we move forward into the show. We do have some hockey-ish news. It's not really hockey, but it's hockey adjacent in these tough times. Over on our Twitter at YWT Podcast, our producer Mike has been running a tournament over the last couple of weeks, and the question is simple: who's the best Flyer of all time? And we started out with 32 names, I think?
I think it was 16.
16 on each side.
16 on each
on
side,
each
right.
side.
So it's 32.
Right.
Yeah, you're a math guy, huh?
Half of the 64 field, exactly.
Right.
Yep.
And we started out with 32, and we've been running our polls over on Twitter. And as we sit here, we're down to the final four. And one of the things we wanted to do on today's show is kind of talk about the final four and kind of break down the matchup a little bit. On one side of the bracket, we have number 1 seed Bobby Clarke against number 2 seed Eric Lindros, which looking at that side of the bracket, I think a lot of people predicted. And then on the other side, number 1 seed Bernie Parent and number 2 seed Claude Giroux. So really no major upsets once we get to the final four.
But if you were leading up to it.
Yeah, I was going to say it was I know there were a couple of matchups that you guys wanted to talk about in terms of the early round play. As in March Madness, there were upsets galore. Kevin, hit me with your favorite one.
Favorite upset?
Yeah, your favorite upset.
Well, I got to look at the actual results. I got my picks in front of me.
Oh, okay.
And I know that, and I know how I would have voted. That's kind of where I'm going with it. Is that
any matchups you wanted to talk about then?
There are a couple. I mean, I know that we got to the Elite Eight portion of it, and Lindros went against Ron Hextall. I was a little surprised that Hextall advanced, honestly, and nothing against him as not for the
Hextall
reasons.
didn't advance.
No, I thought he did from.
Lindros made it through that matchup.
Oh no! I meant advance to that portion.
Oh! I'm sorry.
Like I was a little surprised that Hextall. I was
at that
surprised
phase.
Hextall was his opponent.
Oh, okay.
Like,
You're
I
surprised
fully-
Hextall made it there.
Right. I fully expected that to go the other way, not for Hextall's play as a player, but I feel like anybody, especially when you put it to the audience that we were putting it to, that what have you done for me lately kind of thing, I think people are just going to remember. I mean, granted, he drafted really well and he built the foundation of the current team we're coming to really love this year. But at the same time, I feel like the way that ended, I thought that people were going to push that to the side a little bit. And I fully expected Lindros to go against his Legion of Doom line mate in John LeClaire. That's what I had. Yeah, it was close. It was another one of those ones. There are a few of them where I sit there and I go, boy, this was close in my own weighing
Definitely.
it, I thought that, so that's one of them that I was a little surprised at. I'm going to say this. I love Danny Briere. Okay. I love Danny Briere, but it was absolutely ridiculous that he beat Bill Barber.
Yeah, that was the biggest
That
one
was
for me.
that was ridiculous.
And
And not only that, but here's the thing. Like I look at the matchup that was going to come after that. He was going to, whoever won that portion, the 5-12 that was Barber against Briere, was going to play Pronger Forsberg, whoever won that one, and Pronger won that. And it's like, I thought Pronger as a 4 was high.
for a
If
flyer,
we're talking for a flyer,
I
I
think
know
he got a
he's an
little love from the
all-time. I
selection
know
committee.
he's an all-time great in general, but I feel like
He
it's
just wasn't here
almost,
long enough.
well, but I feel like it's like you're taking one guy and giving him the appropriate ranking for the limited time he was a flyer in Forsberg. Forsberg's a great player, but he's better known for the Colorado years, not that little time he had with the Flyers, even though he was very briefly a captain of this team. I don't think Pronger was that far up on the pedestal. And once it got past that round, I had Barber going on to the following round too. I had him finally bowing out when he would have played Bobby Clark, and then Clark would have gotten a nod easily. I fully agreed with the two teams that got to the Final Four out of that side, no problem. That was exactly who I had.
agreed.
But and the only other one I can think of from the first round that I really weighed was I kind of and this was probably from first round voting, probably would have been the closest one for me. I kind of went sentimental over, I picked Pelle Lindbergh over Brind'Amour, but that was tough. I mean, that was a really tough duo to put together. And
Yeah, but we're talking
between
about
the two.
sample sizes, and say what you want.
And I
about
know we're
Pelle,
talking about
but you gotta
sample sizes.
Talk about that.
I know, and that's why I said I gave him the sentimental vote over the sample size vote. I know.
But Brind'Amour wasn't a flyer for 12 years or 13 years either.
Yeah, that's true. And
He wasn't in Philadelphia. He had a longer, obviously, career as a hockey player, but he didn't
Right.
have that much longer of a flyer career.
right,
And,
and I mean,
Lindbergh arguably accomplished more in his time.
and not only that, but I think his longevity as a member of this organization. I mean, even if you don't officially retire the number, the fact that you won't even touch it
Right.
says a lot about the impact that he made in such a short time.
Right.
And isn't Brind'Amour kind of almost more associated with Carolina now than he is with the Flyers? Just in
I
the
would
sense
say
that, I
so,
mean,
yeah.
he won a cup
he
as a
won the
captain
cup
with
there
that
as a
team, and now
coach,
he's
right.
coaching the
He's
team.
cementing it, yeah, for sure.
So, the interesting thing is, and I believe that most of the results on the opposite side of the bracket in the first round favored most of my picks because I kind of agreed with a lot of what came out. Definitely had Keith Primo beaten JR.
Sure.
Look,
Yeah.
I love Jeremy Roenick as a
For that same
personality, but I
longevity
think
reason
Primo
as Peter
had the
Forsberg.
bigger impact. If you haven't spent your time over this break from gameplay watching some form of highlights, whether it's the way – first of all, Primo was dominant in the 04 playoffs. And then you look at that – the kind of the goal that started it all for him was the 5 overtime goal. That was the one that kind of
The
made him a
goal, man.
legend. And then he became the captain of the team, was one of the key players of that 2004 playoff run. Like all of that factoring in. Like the reason, I mean, again, I know a lot of people kind of weighed back and forth on the Brian Prop, Mike Richards one. I thought that was a no-brainer, though. I thought Prop easily. I mean,
Correct.
you got to do that.
I agree, but I'm surprised the result came out that way. If that makes sense, I would not have.
I
been
can understand where
surprised
you're
if
coming
Twitter
from
voted the other way.
same way that I think that there's enough people that's why I thought that for the same reason I thought LeClaire would beat Hextall.
Right,
If
and
that's
that's
what you're thinking.
There's a
and
lot of bad
that's-
blood out there for Richards, though.
Yeah,
There
and
is.
that's why Barber lost to Briere. Is that same crowd, and
Yeah,
that's
I
why
understand that.
Gagne lost to or beat McLeish.
Yeah, but I thought that one was tougher than you think.
No, I agree. It's a
that one
7-10 matchup. You expect that to
I
be
can-
close. I think that was good seeding. That's a really
Yeah.
good 7-10
It
matchup.
was a good seeding, and the other thing I think about that is that like I looked, there's only sitting there going, gee, I wonder what would have like from the first round anyway. That I go, boy, it was tough to pick, and
Right.
it was the McLeish Gagne matchup because Gagne I think has. It's really tough to pick one or the other as the better career per se. They're kind of almost on the same level where they weren't the superstar player, but they both had really good careers. They're both worthy of being, Flyers Hall of Famers. Gagne should be in there at some point. I mean,
Absolutely.
Look, the biggest crime out of that list that's not in the Flyers Hall of Fame right now is Mark Recchi. That's the biggest crime.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he won his first round matchup easily, and I think that that's fair. The other one that I looked at was Tim Kerr against Eric Desjardins, and as in terms of a tough pick, but I would have gone like everybody else did. I think I would have gone Desjardins. I think when I associate Flyer defensemen, it was cool to put those two together in the next round. Mark Howe against Desjardins. I think that
So two eras.
Well, to this point, I think they're two of the most era-defining defensemen this franchise has ever had. Howe is the greatest one of all time in this franchise's history, and then Desjardins is probably second.
I would agree. I would agree he's second. It distant second, and I know you're not saying he wasn't, but
yeah, exactly.
But I definitely think second.
Yeah, and that's why I think that was a cool matchup. Nothing, Tim Kerr was a great player of his era as well, but I think I had to go there. I actually picked McLeish over Gagne for one reason only. Scored the first punching goal.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.
What can you say?
But I think I agree with you. I think Gagne, though very comparable, I think Gagne had the better career, the longer career.
And again, it's close because McLeish was the first 50-goal scorer in the franchise's history. Like it's very close.
And you can make the argument with McLeish, and again, I know I'm dating myself and all that wonderful stuff, but he was the one trade that Keith Allen made that you can say really put this team in line. Again, I know they have Bobby Clark and Bill Barber and Bernie Parent and all that stuff, but McLeish was that guy that put them somewhat on par with Boston and being able to compete with Boston for multiple lines. That was a huge trade getting McLeish.
Yeah, Senior. Any other matchups that you wanted to talk about in the preliminary rounds, or?
Preliminarily, no. I think, you can make an argument for everyone that won. I was on some of the other sides of those arguments. My beefs come a little bit later.
Okay. And we'll get into those in just a second. But before we do talk about the final four opponents, I want to ask you guys real quick. In the top right-hand corner of the bracket, the Bernie Parent matchup, let's say we sub out Jake Voracek.
Okay.
Who is one player from the current team that you believe will earn a spot on this list at some point in their career? Like who's the next Flyer to crack this list legitimately?
The next, or who are the ones who can?
The next person who cracks this kind of conversation. Is it Ivan Provorov?
I'd say by age, Couturier.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good one. I agree with that.
Okay. And you think he has the ability to ascend to that level of greatness that puts him in this conversation?
I do. I think he has that ability, yeah.
I mean, to chime in on this part, I mean, if we're going to, I think Mike Sr. worded the question the right way. Like, in terms of who has the potential to crack it, not which one would you pick. Because, I mean, I think it's so early for so many of these players that you could sit there and go, well, Carter Hart has
Morgan
the potential to be a top.
Right.
But Carter Hart has the potential to be a top 3 goalie in the franchise's history. Ivan Provorov could be that guy who falls into a category behind Howe and Desjardins as a generational defenseman,
or maybe even better than Desjardins ultimately. Hopefully,
you don't know that. Yeah,
right.
You just don't know. And like I said, who knows? Maybe Carter Hart. If Carter Hart is the goalie who turns out to be the guy who is in goal when they win the next cup, then he's gonna be second to Bernie.
Yep. He's got to be right there, just by default, right?
But that right, like, and that's what I'm saying. It's early. It's
comes
too
down
early
to the rings.
But I mean, honestly, outside of thinking, to Mike Senior's point, Couturier by age, I think the first name
next one.
Well, yes, in terms of the next one, I think that the next best one besides Couturier, who's got the longevity to be on that list to begin with, I would probably pick Carter Hart because I think that he's already started in a year and a half a foundation that's going to make it easy for him to climb through the ranks when we think of goalies anyway. I mean, it's not going to be hard for him to become a top 5 goalie in wins in a matter of 4 years. once
Right.
they get back playing. Obviously, it's not going to be hard. And
It's
if they
not much of an
continue to have the
exaggeration.
success, well, and if they continue to have the success they've already had under Alain Vigneault and the way they've transformed the team, I mean, they on their way to this year before everything got cut off. They were already matching last year's total.
Yep.
No, past it, I think, actually. What were
Yeah.
they at, 40?
Correct.
And that's what I'm saying. So they're at 40 wins under AV as it is. You know, Hart's probably got 25 in his career so far, I think, safely or something like that, or between 25 and 30.
Something in
Well,
that. Yeah.
I think there's only 3 goalies in the history of the franchise that have more than 100 wins.
Right.
Yeah.
So how
Wow.
hard is it to imagine that if he becomes the regular full-time starter, is playing 50 games a year, wins half of them,
He's
at
there in
104
2 years.
He's at 104 years.
Yeah.
And that's
Right.
you know,
Great.
and he'll be 24 years old. He's gonna
Right.
you've got to. He's
He'll
got
just be
24.
signing his first contract.
Right, but at 24, he's got that much time left to be able to get to whatever the 200. You know, to become one of the ones with 200. Like,
Yeah,
he's
and-
gonna
and-
have so much time to be one of the all-time greats in this franchise.
It's crazy to say, but with the start he's gotten, you know, assuming he continues and stays healthy and knock on wood and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, he is set up to challenge in the long-term future.
I just went to go look it up because I actually had skater numbers pulled up, and he's at 40 already. 40
Carter
and
Hart has
70.
40 wins.
40
at, what,
wins in
21 years old?
74 at 21 years old. 40 wins, 74 games played, 70 starts.
Yeah, and if he's setting up even at a conservative number, if he starts 45, 50 games, like you said, and wins 30 of them a year,
Yeah.
he's hitting 100 in like a year and a half.
Well, and,
He's
and
just there already.
let's just do this for perspective here, okay? The rest of the season, they had 13 games left when everything got put on hold.
Yep.
All right, he's 2 behind 18th. 42 with 42 wins with Sergei Bobrovsky and Ken Reggett.
It's safe to assume he would have caught both of those had the season.
Well, he would caught both of those. Brian
continued.
Elliott's the next one in front of those two at 50, by the way. In
He might have
100
caught-
games.
He might have gotten right up with Brian Elliott. Him and Brian Elliott both might have been sitting at 51, 52 coming down the end of the season.
Want some interesting perspective?
Yeah.
Okay, Carter Hart has a 40, 26, and 4 record in 74 games, 70
Oh,
starts
no.
over his 2 seasons. Goals against average is 259, save percentage is 915.
Okay.
In the 2 seasons that Ilya Brizgalov played
Oh,
with the
no.
Flyers, 99 games, so it's more, 99 games and 97 starts. He had a 52, 33, and 10 record,
Okay.
260 goals against, 905 save percentage.
They're still paying him every year for the next 6,
I know,
7, 8
but
years.
I'm also what I'm trying to do by saying that is that's right. First of all, you essentially sold your soul to think you were getting the goalie
And
who was
Sergei
supposed to take you
Bobrovsky.
there. Well, even Bobrovsky's lower, like at that point, lower on this list. I mean, I'm looking at the names that he's going to pass by next year, and I don't doubt that he will by next year, especially if they do finish out this season.
Assuming
the way
there
they
is a
think.
next year.
I think there definitely will be a next year. I just
I this is all true about Hart, and I hear
Yeah.
that. Okay, but who are the best 2 Flyer defensemen? Obviously, we talked about Hal Desjardins.
Yeah.
Who's number 3? So far down the list, the name doesn't even matter. So now, if you look at the top goalies, obviously a Perrant,
Mhm.
Hextall, Lindbergh. Okay, the Hart becoming the 3rd best Flyer goalie in history at a fairly young age. I don't think that automatically puts him in the top 16 or top 32 of the Flyers all time. He's got,
Right.
That's fair.
He's got a ways to go more than just becoming the Flyers' 4th best goalie ever or 3rd best goalie ever.
No, I
We've had
totally
so
agree.
few goalies. It's a very easy list to get up. Actually, I think that was your point, Kevin.
Yeah, I just see it. I see it over time. I think that makes him an easy one to go to and say 5 more years or whatever. And you go, now that he's played 7, 8 years of his career here,
Yeah,
and
I
you
would
go,
agree.
oh my goodness. I mean,
Yeah.
let's put it this way: 3rd place on the wins list in Flyers franchise history for among goalies is Steve Mason.
Right.
Oh,
the
my
And
goodness.
right, and he's associated arguably with one of these eras that is not memorable at all. I mean, his time here was 13 to 17.
Right. Right. Now, I trajectory wise and everything that you went through and what you've laid out, he's probably the most likely.
Yeah.
But I think Couturier is arguably the next guy to get there.
I think so too.
I think given his age at what's he 27 right now ish, I think. And I
Sean
think he's
Couturier is 6 weeks older than me, so yeah, he's about 27.
yeah. So and this is I think clearly his best year. from more than just a points perspective. Just
Yeah, I
the
would say
way he's
that.
playing the game. So I think he's hitting another level. I think if he does that next level for another 4, 5, 6 years in his prime, I think you got a guy that we'll be looking back on and saying, yeah, he was one of those guys and an all-time flyer great. I think he'll get there.
Well, let's put it this way, too. I mean, Sean Couturier, for his career, was not really – like, everything was he's not the scorer. He had the defensive side. And up until 3 years ago when he started to put up the 70-point seasons, that's when everybody said, oh, look, he's now this well-rounded, all-around player.
All of a sudden he's scoring 30,
but
right?
Quietly over his 9 years with this team, he's put up over 400 points. And, and he's 20th on the all-time list.
Right.
And he is still only 27. He's gotten more experience than a lot of the young guys, obviously, but he's nowhere near done. He is still hitting his prime.
Right. Do you want me to make the fair point that Mike Sr.'s absolutely on the ball with exactly why he'd be the next one in? You had in the first round, you had Claude Giroux go against Murray Craven, and Murray Craven has only 22 more points than Couturier has.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
Like, if that's the deciding factor or something close to it, then he's right there. Like, I think Couturier was probably the 33rd.
What's Murray Craven's claim to fame?
The overtime goal.
That as well.
That's one of them. He scored the first goal of a game 7 to the last.
Exactly. He's the first flyer. He's the last flyer to give them the lead in a game 7 for the Stanley Cup.
He did have a playoff overtime goal against Washington too. That was very famous.
Yeah, very memorable. Yes, correct.
If you talk about clutch goals and potential, you tell me you don't see Sean Couturier scoring a clutch goal like that and putting himself in this conversation right along with Murray Craven?
I think he already did. I thought
I'm talking about big time fourth.
Oh no, I think
fourth round.
But he's already. But I think he already proved he had the chops for that in the Pittsburgh series.
When he's playing on one leg.
He's playing on one leg, scores a game-winning goal with a minute left to extend your season, and then in a game where unfortunately by the time he scored the hat trick goal, it didn't matter. But 5 points
I was at that game
and it
was wild.
And those big playoff moments and big playoff goals, that's really where you understand the Danny Briere upset.
Yeah.
And of all those,
that run was legendary.
Of all those long career, short flyer career guys like Pronger, et cetera, Primo, I think Briere arguably, him and Primo were probably neck and neck as the two guys who did the most in a flyer uniform for the short period of time that they were here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I have no problem with either one of those two advancing, even though I think they got the Barber-Briere one wrong.
You know what?
And this is why I went back to the seeding on the Pronger-Forsberg matchup, because I could have seen if you would have made Barber the 4 and then Briere the 5 and put them against each other in the next round. I'm fine with Briere advancing past. We're trying to think he's an all-time fan favorite.
Correct. Yeah,
and he's
absolutely.
a guy who, with the playoff success, he's got that associated with him. But I thought it was kind of unfair to sit there and go, well, here's the two. I mean, like, let's put it this way. I just argued – who'd I argue I thought was too – I argued Pronger was too high and Briere was a 12. And Briere had the longer career.
Correct. Yeah, my son loves Pronger.
Well, of course he does, and I do too.
Which I understand. Yeah, there's a lot to love there.
If he was big and enormous and hit the crap out of people and fought and was dirty and it was great.
If he didn't get hurt that year, I think they have a legitimate chance to make a run.
I think they win the cup that year.
I think they
might. Who knows?
That's the one thing I've taken from watching a lot of the old stuff now this last couple of weeks. That team was good. That they weren't great, but they were really good.
Yeah.
And if they had Pronger, I think Pronger was mostly still what he was. He wasn't, there was still a lot of tread on that tire still.
Oh yeah.
But 2 years before, he scored 24 points in the playoffs. People forget. Yeah, he would bury you, and you couldn't get around him, and he could get the puck out of the zone. He was a great defensive defenseman, but he could score too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember him scoring too much or having as many points in the Stanley Cup final of that year. But the rounds leading up to it, I mean, he's scoring power play goals like left and right.
He had like 24 points in 21 games or something crazy.
And I think as a leader too, I think he was exactly what the team needed at that time in terms of this. He was going to be the vocal guy. I think everybody else who we've seen throughout the process, when we talk about Mike Richards or we talk about now with Claude Giroux, it's a guy who is leader by example. He's not the vocal guy. And Pronger was the guy who wasn't afraid to get in your face, talk to you about it, and do it with anybody. I mean, everybody remembers the things with the media too. Like he had those moments too.
Yeah, Kevin, you're 100% right. It did not matter who you were. When you went into the corner for the puck, you knew if you didn't give him max effort to get the puck away from the other guy, when you were going into the locker room, he was going to be there waiting for you. You couldn't play with Pronger and not give max effort. He wouldn't allow it.
Yeah, and he definitely had that leadership. And since we mentioned leadership, I think that transitions us really nicely into our conversation about the Final Four. Because one of the things the Final Four has in common, probably the three most iconic captains in the history of the franchise, and then the goaltender who led them to 2 Stanley Cups, and then a third final the following year. So we're looking back at our Twitter bracket, bringing us back to this Twitter poll. The left side of the bracket has wound up in Bobby Clarke against Eric Lindros.
Boy, if only there was a way to really get them into a room.
I would pay.
Boy, wouldn't that be something?
Well, today it would be nothing, I don't think. Yeah, but a few years ago, different story.
They're probably both too old now, but yeah, they're both mellowed.
But either way,
but in the right moment, that would have been a very interesting conversation.
As we sit here recording on Sunday, March 29th, 2020, Mike Sr., Bobby Clarke, Eric Lindros, who you got?
Okay, I'm gonna tell you the answer real quick to the question is Bobby Clarke. It's hands down. It's not even close. It should have been Eric Lindros. That's the problem.
We agreed about this. Okay, cool.
That's the problem with Eric Lindros. We were watching a lot of the Canada, Russia 1970s stuff, and there was a game very late, maybe in game 6 or 7, where Bobby Clarke literally takes his stick, and I think it was Kharlamov, and chops him and breaks his ankle. Okay, and Canada goes on because they couldn't catch him. They were getting beat up by this guy, scoreboard wise. Okay, that's Clark's desire to win. He didn't care what he looked like. He didn't care what it looked like. All he wanted was, I can't catch this guy, so I need him gone. I want to win. He wanted to win that bad. And if he needed to put his face in front of a puck instead of chopping the guy's ankle off, he would have done that too. That's who Bobby Clarke, the player, was. And Lindros just never got there. He liked to win. Clarke hated to lose. That whole Michael Jordan comparison thing. That's why, talent-wise, it's all Eric Lindros. Everything else outside of talent, it's all Bobby Clarke 10 times over, twice on Sunday.
Kevin, your response?
Completely 1,000% agree.
Wow.
And I will elaborate on it. There have been a lot of names on the list to this point that I think you could sit there and say, and I guess I think a top 2 for this would be Pelly Lindbergh's right up on this one too, is the all potential list, if you will. I think that Lindros is probably at the top of it as well, just because of the fact that you saw glimpses of what he could be. I mean, everything leading up to the first couple seasons were great. 95 was a whole nother level. 97 was another level beyond that to a sense, where the team success was built around it. So they had they had everything going for them. And in those last few years up until 2000, it seemed like they were going to be destined to do something. At some point during this, they were going to find a way to do this. And he was going to be the next one to be the captain of the team that got him to where they wanted to go. And ultimately the injuries got in the way, and it never happened. And his career was never the same after that anyway. I think when you look back at Lindros' career and you see the biggest number for me is not necessarily, hey, how many games he played or how many points he had or anything like that. It's points per game. He was so far above in points per game that is the one guy that I think would have been able to catch Bobby Clarke's numbers and surpass him and be the greatest Flyer possibly of all time if he would have not only had the numbers individually, but the playoff success as well. And I don't doubt that there would have, if he's healthy through all of that stuff and the team is healthy through all that stuff, because even in 97 when he's not going through concussions, the team is going through everything else. I mean, by the time they got to the Detroit series, they were just battered, beaten down, and there was nothing left in the tank. And we look at that. I think we've talked about it before, where that Detroit team is just loaded with Hall of Famers. So
he played he played in the Detroit series, though. Right?
No, he did, but I think everybody it's the hidden injuries. Everybody's playing through something. So I think they were so beaten down by the time that series rolled around that I think you look back on it now and you look across the way and you go, who's on the roster on the other side? And you realize the talent that was on that side too. And you go, realistically, in hindsight, that wasn't near as
That
much
team never
of a
had a
surprise
chance.
team. Right. Well,
The
it's
team-
not.
but
It's not as
the team didn't have a chance, and I agree with that. But at the same time, to me, that is the low water mark of the Lindros era. Was that series as good as that playoff run was? He did absolutely nothing, and I'm not talking about goals and scoring and all that stuff. I'm talking about he did nothing at no point in that series, and I think that's mostly what defines him and kind of where his head is. He did nothing during that series to turn the series around. Nothing at no point in time. Not a hit, not a fight, not something stupid to change the tide. He didn't. He accepted we're not as good as them. They're going to beat us. We're out in 4. He just accepted it and never recovered from it.
And I do think part of his leadership time as well is not defined, but like I think you go look at the way the playoff results go from one year to the next. I mean, you go 95, they're right there on the cusp of making the final, and they don't. And then the next year they're a first round exit. Then they make a cup run. Then they're out again in like the first round. Then like there's these gaps where they weren't consistently being one of those Final Four teams. We can pick out a few years where they came close, but there's not that consistent string of years the way Detroit did it or the way that other team, there's other teams in the running that did it like that. I mean, I even think in that era, Buffalo was making longer playoff runs in more consecutive years than the Flyers were. And right. I think that defines it a little bit too. From an individual standpoint, I think that he's right up there as one of the top players. He could have been second, at least second best, possibly the best.
And yeah, exactly. Very, very possibly the best. He's still top 10 or even 5 points per game.
I have no idea what it is in points per game.
He's up there.
He's sixth in points and has 3 years less than anybody else on the list.
Right.
And that's the thing.
Yeah, his points per game, I'm almost sure he's still top 10.
Yeah. And to me, for that reason, I think that there's no doubt in my mind that he would have been right up there, but I think you have to look at that point, you have to shift gears and you go, who's the person who defines leadership in this franchise? And that's who gets the win. It's Bobby Clarke.
Okay.
Yes, and you would agree, Kyle, with most of that, if not all?
I mean, yeah.
I know you're not his biggest fan.
My feelings about Eric Lindros have been made clear numerous times throughout the history of this show.
I think you're a little too down on him, but that's another conversation for another day.
I'm willing to concede that that's probably true. I think he is firmly the most overrated player to ever play for this franchise. I think he would have been a great player if he knew how to catch a pass in his skates without having to look down at it, because he would do that and just get lit up, and that's what got him into trouble because he didn't have the head to take the hits that he was taking. And then he was, on top of that, he was too dumb to tell people about it when he was hurt on multiple occasions.
So in all of that was a statement that, if I'm hearing it correctly, you're saying he wasn't great?
Correct.
Okay.
I do not believe his number should be retired.
That's different than was he a great player?
No, because for me, you have to be great to get your number retired.
I agree with that, but you don't.
For sure.
Not every great player deserves to have his number.
No,
retired.
that's true.
That's all I'm saying. So, to me,
but I would agree. I mean, no, I do not believe Eric Lindros. I don't believe Eric Lindros deserves to be here in the tournament. But no, I definitely don't think he deserves to make it past the man who captained you to your 2 Stanley Cups in franchise history.
No, 100% does not.
At the end of the day, that's it.
Bobby Clarke. Yeah,
no, Bobby Clarke is
for sure.
Bobby Clarke is the definition of greatness for this franchise. But he is the
only person in this bracket to clean sweep a matchup in the first round. Not a single person voted for Andre Dupont over him. And they shouldn't have.
And that was legit.
And they shouldn't have.
That was legit.
And Moose would have gotten mad if you did.
Here's the irony of that though. Probably Bobby Clarke's greatest scoring moment in the NHL comes because of Andre Dupont though. We're not talking about an overtime goal for Bobby Clarke if you don't get the game tying goal late from Moose. So
true.
I just find that ironic. Now I want to counter Kyle's point on Eric Lindros being great. Okay, because I do think he's a great player, and here's why. I don't know that there's anybody over the last definitely 10 years, maybe 15 or 20 in this franchise's history, that is a player who, from league standards, got the kind of attention that Lindros did. I don't associate. I know we're gonna get into this discussion a little later on, No, because I know there's another player we're going to talk about in this same breath here, but
Yep.
I don't find that player to be considered one of the top players in the league or considered one of the faces of the league. Lindros was a face of the league at that time. People felt he was must-see television. You know, I mean, I think about the way, like, go watch his first couple goals in the NHL and realize the way that national networks covered him and thought, like, because everybody saw Hall of Fame potential from the very beginning. And that's what, to me, you know, the fact that he still put up those kind of numbers for the first 8 years of his career and then everything fell off, I still think that defines an era of greatness. You know, he was the way that I look at it is that from a league standpoint, they were on national television as much as any team, and not just because like it has been recently because
Comcast owns the
well,
team.
because of the NBC Comcast connection. Comcast owns the team. NBC's an affiliate, like everything's affiliated in that way. Please put our team on your network.
They're all in bed together. Yeah.
Right, like kind of. And that's why I'm saying in that respect, I think that when you didn't need to get the attention from ESPN or any other network that was putting your games on ABC, any network that was putting your games on nationally, they were constantly putting the Flyers on their networks because and it wouldn't be just, hey, we're putting the Flyers on because they're a good team. We're putting them on because and we're opening and it's right away a shot of, look, here's Eric Lindros. Let's talk about Lindros. That was the guy. And even after he was traded, those first games between the Rangers and Flyers were always on national TV because it was, again, now we have another storyline. He's back in Philly. We've got to watch that game. That was that. I think that the greatness, his own greatness, made that must see, and that's why I think he was a great player because he gave you the attention on a national level that some other teams don't get because they don't have that player.
Well, and it was warranted, and there was
Exactly.
also a changing of the guard moment that he had when he beats Messier to that puck to end that series and advance. Messier was at that moment, you know, a fading star, but still the gem of the league, 6 Stanley Cups, 2 without Gretzky. I mean, he was, you know, the toast of New York. He was everything, you know, the NHL put out there. He was the guy. Lindros beats him to the puck, scores the goal, ends the series, and it was, okay, here's the next one.
It was a passing of the guard. Yep.
Correct. Exactly.
See, when I think of passing of the torch moments in Eric Lindros, I think of him getting the C ripped off and Eric Desjardins getting it, you know, stitched on right before Wednesday Night Hockey.
Yeah, that's ultimately how bad it went. I understand that. And that's why he's not going to beat Bobby Clark.
Right. But Kevin, to your point, to a certain extent, is it Claude Giroux's fault? Because that's the argument you're making, is that essentially
you're jumping into another argument.
No. That essentially Kevin doesn't.
Is he great or is he not great? That's the argument.
Okay, but Kevin, you said that no player in the last 10, 15, maybe 20 years has gotten the national attention that Eric Lindros got. Is it Claude Giroux's fault that he played at the same time as Sidney Crosby and Alexander Ovechkin?
No, it's not. But at the same time, like, don't you feel like when they put his picture up next to Crosby's and sit there and try to make that a thing, like it's like they're throwing it in there, like just to throw it in there, like almost as if they can't pick the player that they really want to say represents the team. You know,
okay, then you can't say anybody who played with Wayne Gretzky was a great player because none of them matched up in their era, and it's not their fault. You know, it's not.
But you don't have to be as great as Wayne Gretzky to be great.
Right, and not only that, but I would sit there and say, look, Wayne Gretzky defines an entire generation of hockey.
Okay,
and not just that, but I like when you are a face of the league, of course you're going to get the attention because you are great. And sure. I think what I'm trying to say is, and I understand, okay, yes, is Giroux playing at a time when there's other great players? Sure he is. But I don't think you can argue their greatness, like the greatness of the other players you're talking about, the Crosbys and the Ovechkins. They're great because they rank up there because they have the point per game numbers, the star power.
I'm not arguing that.
No, but Lindros was that guy in the 90s. He was one of those guys. Lindros was right in the same ranking with Yzerman and with all these, with Yzerman. Jeremy Roenick was running the show in certain parts of it. Brett Hull was running the show in certain parts of it. Like, those are the guys that you would put, like, all these Hall of Famers. He was one of them who was getting that kind of attention. Yager. Those are guys like it, but it felt legitimate to put him in those conversations. I don't think it's as legitimate to put Giroux in the same conversation as Crosby on that scale. I'm not talking about Giroux's level of greatness within the franchise. I'm talking about it on a national scale.
Right.
Where, unfortunately, the way it works is that there are great players who play for teams that are not so great all the time. It doesn't change the fact that they are going to rank high in numbers around the league, but they don't have that other aspect, which is playoff exposure. He needed, I think Lindros still had playoff exposure constantly throughout the 90s. They didn't miss the playoffs after a certain point. They just kept making playoff appearances from, 93 or 94 to 2006 was the next time they missed the playoffs. You can, when you have that kind of longevity and you're there and you're one of 16 left competing and you're not just one of 16, but you can take safely, I'll say 6 of those teams and say, you're in a different time zone anyway. So we can spotlight the East Coast and put that Flyer Ranger game on, or put that Flyer Penguins game on, or whatever it is, and give him the exposure. I don't know, I feel like ever since the networks changed too, it's like anything with the Flyers and Giroux is a little bit more of a handout. And Giroux is like that player who's pulled just because he's the leading point guy on the team or whatever. And again, I'm not trying to say that he's not the guy I would pick to be the picture that goes with it. And they go, well, Crosby and the Penguins take on Giroux and the Flyers. Like, I'm not saying he's not deserving of being that guy that they try to pull in, but it doesn't feel like it has the same effect as when it was Lindros, Messier. And there's a totally different effect to those two names as opposed to Giroux and Crosby or Giroux and Ovechkin.
Correct. And can you imagine Lindros in his prime being put next to Crosby? And that we're going to play each other. How, the cachet that would have had.
Yeah. I mean, that would have been
Giroux.
And that would have been at a time when Lindros would have kind of been assuming the Messier role, and Crosby would have been the next one. Yeah.
And Kyle, also Kyle, as far as when you compare eras, and because you had said something in there are great players in every era. There's never an era where you could say this era's superstars weren't as good as that era's superstars.
Right.
Every era has great superstars. The Gretzky, of course, is the greatest of all, so that era had the greatest. But every era has a group of 5 or 6 guys over a 10-year period that were great and would have been great in 1920, 1950, 1980, 2030. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter. They were going to be great. There always are those players. And those are the barometers that you use to say, was this guy great?
Sure. Not only that, but I think when they did a couple years back, when they did the 100 top players in the 100 years or whatever, the number of players that came out that I can sit there and I go, oh, I remember watching that guy, and I don't have a whole lot of watching experience as compared to Mike Senior.
Right.
But the number of players that I sit there,
you're not as old.
But I sit there and I go, I remember that guy. I remember watching him play. I remember, he used to do damage to the Flyers all the time, something like that. You know what I mean? Like, there was a number of guys even from that era that came out. And you go, I didn't think of it like that. And
for sure.
There are players out of that era, the 90s or the early 2000s, that you sit there and you go, yeah, I didn't think of, I forgot how great of a player he was, or yes, I remember watching him, and you go, he's not even in the top 5 of that group.
Right.
And it doesn't take away from the fact that even if he's not a top 5 of the era.
Okay. Correct. Well, let's jump over to the other side and talk about one Mr. Claude Giroux, because he has run into Bernie Parent in the what we're calling the Final Four here. Based on how this previous conversation went, I have a feeling I know how your votes are going.
Well, we'll talk about that matchup and who's going to win it, because if he wins that matchup, if Giroux beats Parent, my phone's going to go right through the front window. Okay, that's first off, because now I'll get to
Twitter. Can you do that for me, please? Because that would be great.
Because stop bringing the votes.
Man, no, I'm allowed to campaign. That's why we're talking about it. Absolutely.
No, stop trying to campaign for what the inevitable should be.
If I can't campaign, why am I hosting this show?
I can't imagine people not. I mean, they love Bernie so much.
Yeah.
The 2 cups, the playoff stud, the drinking fun loving guy that everybody loves. I can't. He might win that one 5-1. But anyway, getting back to the previous round that Giroux won, that's where I have the major problem with this entire setup. Not that he won. I have a problem with him winning, but the degree to which he beat Mark Howe was a complete and utter disgrace.
Well,
Yeah, I'm calling everybody out to the entire fan base. You think you know Flyers hockey, and if you give Giroux an 83-17 win over Markel, you do not know what you're talking about.
that's not how polls work.
I don't care Twitterverse.
If 5 is
I
bigger
don't
than
care
4,
how
5 is
old they
always
are.
bigger than 4.
You can't know what you're talking about if you give Giroux a 83-17 win over Markel.
Okay, no. But nobody gave Giroux an 83-17 win over Markel. Every single individual person gave Claude Giroux a 1-0 victory over Markel.
The Flyer fan base.
Yes, gave him a 1. Everybody gave him. That's how it works. If 5 is bigger than 4, 5 is always bigger than 4, no matter how many times you run it.
If it was the 52-48 Giroux win, I'd say I think they got it wrong, but they were in the game. They got it wrong, but they gave Hal the love that he deserved. 17% of the Flyer fan base voting for him in that poll at that spot is a disgrace to Flyer fans everywhere.
Okay, that's not how numbers work, but okay.
Sure it is.
Let's talk about this current matchup.
Well, hold on a minute, because I'm chiming in on this part too. Okay, because here's the thing. First of all, detailed demographics here, because I'd like to know how many people who voted on that.
It's a Twitter poll. I don't think we have demographics.
I know, but
I'd
love
to know what they were.
I'd like to know, because I'm saying how many people don't even. And I'm not. Look, I was not alive when Mark Howe was a Flyer. Okay, I don't have that watching experience. Doesn't mean I don't know how great of a player he was.
Right. And
go back and watch something.
Right. That's
go back and watch something. We're all falling down the YouTube hole right now.
Exactly.
Go watch some 80 highlight videos and see how great of a mobile defense. If you if you think that Shane Gostisbehere is great right now, then you got to realize that Mark Howe was doing the mobile defenseman first.
And 10 times better.
Right. Before anybody else was doing it, he was the offensive defenseman.
He was a plus 85 one year.
And plus minus, and I know plus minus means nothing today, but in that time frame, before we got into all of the analytics that there are out there now, that was a number that defined whether whether you kept the puck out of the net or not,
right?
Whether it was by luck or by skill. And he was keeping the puck out of the net and scoring on the other end and helping his teammates score. That's the thing. That's why I said it. To me, I just like to see the demographics to see what the age level was and how many people.
The answer.
Yeah,
I know the answer.
I understand that I know the answer, but I'm saying it's like that. Then that to me is ridiculous.
For the record, in a group text where we were discussing this bracket, I told Mike Sr. before this whole thing started, I said, we're gonna get some answers that upset you because the nature of Twitter. I warned you that the demographics were not gonna be your thing, and I expected more incidents like the Danny Briere incident. As it were.
Yes, but see, I think that I'm sorry. Anybody who has grown up as a Flyers fan, no matter what age you are, take one trip to Wells Fargo Center, look up, and that should be your answer. You know what I mean? Just look up.
Yep.
I don't know. I'm not sitting here talking about the guys I talk about, not idolizing guys in my growing up years like John LeClair and Simone Gagne and guys like that who I really loved watching play. If I'm not knowledgeable about the guys who came before, and knowing that for as great as Bobby Clarke is and as deserving as he is of that spot that he's going to have that he has in the Final Four and probably should have in the final, based on what we've discussed.
Right.
He played on a line with two other great players that you've got to give props to. You got to sit there and say just as great was Bill Barber and Reggie Leach. Yeah. And you need to know that before you can't just start with the Legion of Doom. You've got to start with that line because that was the first great line. You've got to go back and know your history.
You got to know your history, but at the same time, that's the nature of the poll. Because even though the question was asked, "Who's the best Flyer of all time?" a large portion of respondents will respond, "Who's your favorite Flyer of all time?"
Well, and that's fair. I understand that.
Because if we were doing this just strictly on, the numbers, then there wouldn't be upsets. There wouldn't be conversations. There wouldn't be debate. You look at Clark's numbers and compare them to Lindros's and say, oh, there it is. And also Two Cups, there it is. But there's more to it than that. There's layers to the story. And that's going to happen in any sort of poll where you give people a choice. And in this situation, the demographic is more likely to love Claude Giroux than they are to love Mark Howe.
Well, I'll go back to the Barber Briere matchup though too. You could argue, given the point differential, Barber's got way more points, longer career as a Flyer than Briere does. You could argue that Briere was the better playoff performer, the more clutch player, whatever you want to go into with that.
Right.
And make that the reason you pick him over Bill Barber. I just
And
don't
that's
think
why there's more to it.
but I
than
don't
just the
think that the
numbers.
I understand that's a reasoning for some people. I'm not trying to say that Bill Barber needed a clean sweep against Danny Briere. I'm saying it shouldn't have even been an upset. Like it
Right.
just shouldn't be an upset because of the fact that
they should have been matched up
it shouldn't be an
differently.
upset because
Right.
you need to know your history here, you know, and even from a recent standpoint, sure, I'm not going to know Bill Barber, the player, obviously, but I do
Right.
remember Bill Barber, the coach, and he won a Jack Adams.
Yeah.
Like
And you know he's in the Hockey Hall of Fame.
that too.
I mean, you know, and I don't want anyone to get confused.
And his numbers
Yes.
also in the rafters.
Yes, Danny Briere was a clutch playoff performer. I think maybe Kevin, you unintentionally implied that Barber wasn't. Barber was money in the playoffs.
Mhm.
Okay, it's
Oh,
not
sure.
like he, it's not like
I
he
think
wasn't. Yeah, no, I didn't think.
Yeah.
I know you didn't mean to do that.
No,
But anyone
the-
listening, I don't. You know, he won
You
2
did.
cups.
It
Barber.
seemed like you elevated Briere above.
No,
Barber's.
I said you
Well, he
could
did it-
argue.
he-
No, I said you
yeah,
could
he did it
argue
more
Briere was
often.
more clutch.
Right,
That's
okay.
what I said. Yeah.
He did it more often in more postseasons. He didn't just do it here. He did it in Buffalo.
Yeah.
I mean, he was, you know, and he elevated in the playoffs more so where Barber was the same in the playoffs as he was in the regular
Correct.
season. He was still good. Briere
Right.
he would go 60 points, 25 in the playoffs. I mean, it was crazy.
Right.
Right. And
So-
the other thing I was looking at was that you could sit there and say that over the course of a career with the Flyers, because they probably had close to the same number of playoff appearances or playoff games played, you could sit there and look and go, you know, Briere's right up there probably with Barber in terms of playoff point totals and go, okay,
Right.
they're on a similar playing field. But I don't think it was a comparison when you put the whole package together. I mean, it wasn't even close when you put the
Right.
whole
Bill Barber was definitely the better Flyer. I mean,
Yes.
it's not even a question.
Now, look, I do want to make a point on the Giroux Howe thing for a second because look,
Yep.
again, I said from the very beginning here, I think Mark Howe is the greatest Flyer defenseman in franchise history, no question about it. I would have given, and again, I think when you pin it all down, it's not an 83-17 for me in terms of, and here's how I'll say it, because again, I know your point, Kyle, is it's just a 1-0 vote for everybody. You're right. Except that, like, I can sit there and go, let me write down pros of why I would vote him over him. You know, why I would vote Giroux over Howe or vice versa. And I'd probably come away with, if I tried to write down 5 things for each of them, it might come out 5-4 and be that slight of an edge in terms
Sure.
of, like, I can
That's
write
fair.
down a bunch of positives for Howe and I can write down a bunch of positives for Giroux, and it would be close. I ended up saying, look, if I put Giroux over Howe in that situation in the results for one reason. And I think that when we look, and again, I think the hard part and the reason it's hard to do this right now is because Giroux is an active player.
Yes.
Yes, he's got a great place already in franchise history, no question
Had
about
to
it.
see longer than anybody.
But I don't, well, exactly. But I don't, and that's not my reason. My reason is that I think when we look back on his career, in terms, first of all, both of them obviously never won a cup. You know, and that's one
Right.
thing, that they're going to be an even playing field there. I think that Giroux's I sit there and I look at the number of games played that Giroux has, and the fact, like, let's put it this way, I think that if everything would have been going, if we weren't having, and granted, we wouldn't be having this discussion if we were able to see the number of games continue to go up,
Right.
but by the end of the year, he was going to be tied for second all time in franchise history in games played, and then has the point totals to back it up too, where he's in the top 5 in those categories. He's a top 10 goal scorer. He's second in assists. You know,
In an era where numbers are lower than they
well,
were.
in an era
for-
where numbers are lower,
Yeah.
and on teams that were not nearly as successful.
Correct.
And that's I think,
As the
like I
focal
said,
point
like
of
I
those
said,
games.
I don't disagree that it is a discussion that needs to stop happening about whether or not that, like, everybody should be appreciating what this guy has done over the
Yep.
course of 10, 12 years. You know, everybody needs to do that.
I think
Absolutely.
most
That
people at this point have come around.
discussion
There
is
are
ridiculous.
There are very few holdouts left.
Yeah, unlike you, Kyle, I will say, for all my dislike at times of Giroux, I will say he is a great player.
Yeah.
Okay, and he's just this side of the Hall of Fame. So that's not really the
Okay.
issue. What I'm saying is, if you start a team tomorrow,
Mhm.
and you have to take in the next selection, Giroux's on the board and Howe's on the board. To me, it's a no-brainer. You're taking Howe all day long.
It's a little bit of
Okay.
a different question just because of how important defensemen are, but I understand where you're coming from.
And,
Well,
and he
you
came,
can
and he,
you can argue that at that point in time, then you can argue that Howe played the more important position than Giroux does, and that does make him
Totally.
an important and
I
well,
agree.
center's pretty important. Also, the second point of that was, it's been my contention, and so far it's been proven true. As long as Giroux is the best player on this team will never win the Stanley Cup.
Okay.
Hopefully, I again, I want to be so wrong about that. Okay, and if Carter Hart proves to be the guy who can be the best player on the team, then maybe we can win a cup with Giroux. But he's no longer our best player. It'll be hard. Mark Howe was the best player on that team, and that team was good enough to win the Stanley Cup. They just unfortunately happened to go against twice in 3 years the greatest team in the history of hockey, one of which they took to Game 7.
Yep.
So he was right. He was right there, and the best player on a team that absolutely could win the Stanley Cup. So to me, that's why he's better.
And just for the record, we did talk about that 2012 team being very, very good. Or I'm sorry, the team where Chris Pronger got hurt. We talked about that team being very, very good. And Claude Giroux did get to Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Final.
If Pronger doesn't get hurt, he's not the best player on that team.
Okay.
Pronger is.
Okay, but he would have. Okay, but he could have had a cup, so he was right there in the same way that Howe was right there. I just wanted to point that out.
I understand, but I'm saying as far as how good he is, he's still, if Pronger doesn't get hurt and they win the cup, he still was the second best player on that team.
But for the record,
it goes back
to the record, they have the same number of cup wins.
Who?
Howe and Giroux.
Same number of cup wins.
Yes, they both have 0.
Okay.
Let's go into our matchup because that matchup is done. Our Twitter users have already decided on that one.
Yeah, I know, but we're having a good discussion about it.
Yeah, for sure.
No, because here's the thing. It goes back to the discussion of greatness, okay?
Yeah.
Greatness is defined in different ways, especially in this particular sport. And I say that meaning you can have a bunch of players who are great, who are on poor teams. We already got into that part of it, but you also can break it down by positions. I don't think there was anybody who was disputing over that decade that Mark Howe was the best defenseman of that time frame. And you can only pick a handful of others that you can throw in there. He fits into the bill with Ray Bourque and Paul Coffey and guys like that. And there was no disputing that. In Giroux's case, can you pick out 4 or 5 other forwards or centers or whatever who you can pull in there? I think you can.
At least.
You know, and it starts obviously with a Crosby, but then you can continue to go down the list, and it's not, you know, like at the end of the day, is Jonathan Toews better than Giroux? I'd say yes. For the playoffs.
You have to.
Yep.
You know, and that's the thing. And I don't think Jonathan Toews is even top 5 among forwards in that grouping, because then I can pick Kane and Ovechkin and, you know, smattering of others that are still part of it too. You know, I can pick those guys. I can say Patrice Bergeron is a top 10 player because of the two-way play, and he still has the offensive chops and won a cup.
A couple of them, I believe.
No, just one.
No, just the one. You're right.
Once in the last 20 years.
Right.
Just a brief.
I have no problem reminding people of that.
brief point. Side note, just about the game of hockey. Nothing to do with our Twitter thing that we're doing here. Nothing shows you how much of a team game it really is when you look at Toews and Kane.
Yeah.
And look at the portions of their career. They're still the players they were when they were winning Stanley Cups.
Yeah.
They really are.
Yeah.
And now they're not even close to winning the Stanley Cup.
No, and here's the thing. Why is that? Because of Duncan Keith and Brent Seabrook and the defensemen who power your way through. You need the back end too.
Yeah, it is. It's so much a team game. It really, really is.
And I want to go to Mike Senior's point on this too, where he's saying maybe that, you know, they won't win until Giroux is not the best player on the team. Whatever. I've said for a while that if you can get enough depth in this team to be able to sit there and say, not only is Giroux not necessarily the best player on the team, but he doesn't even have to be a first liner. That might be the recipe to success. How many teams take a player? But how many teams take a player? And I'm thinking Brind'Amour's Moore's Carolina years, and he was still a top player at the time, but I'm thinking Brind'Amour's Moore's Carolina years, or Tampa Bay with Dave Andreychuk. Down the line, it's the veteran captain who's at the end of the rope and is starting to wind down the career, and these kids, think Tampa Bay 04, Martin St. Louis, and Vinny LeCavalier, and Brad Richards. They were all young guns at that time, and they were the 3 that powered the way through.
Correct.
And granted, a team like that doesn't win the Stanley Cup without good depth players like, if you can believe it, Ruslan Fedotenko, you know, who turns out to be a good middle 6 kind of guy who delivers in big moments. And Andreychuk is the feisty veteran captain who's going to lead that team to the promised land. And they had a good back end too, and a good goalie. And every piece has to fit in place. And sometimes the guy who's leading your team doesn't have to be the guy who's the best player on your team. He just needs to be the guy who helps guy. That's why I love Alain Vigneault's point from the very beginning. He's not here to carry them. He's got a guide. You've got to be a guidance post, move everything along and keep it on track so that they don't go too far off course and fall apart. That's what he's done. And all of these players buying in means that other guys are having more success than necessarily your captain, your leader. It doesn't have to be that way.
Yep, no, that's 100%. That's exactly, Kevin, what happened basically in Detroit with Yzerman. As much as he learned to get it and do the little things that it took to win games and sacrifice the body, when Fedorov got there and Lidstrom got there, and he was the third best player. Yep, Stanley Cups.
You took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say Lidstrom was probably the best player on that team, and Fedorov was a very close second.
Correct. And I'm a Stevie Y guy through and through. I love Stevie Y.
Well, and I'll admit that over the course, because I think this is a great kind of a good segue for a second before we get into those matchups, because
I do want to get back to the finals of our
yeah, I know you
here.
do. Yeah. But you also threw out there the name 4 players who have meant a lot in your life. The list that I could have put together far exceeded 4, because over the course of the 90s, there were so many players I could have picked, and I liked Brandon Shanahan, as a player. Yep. And we didn't even mention him in that grouping. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't mention him in my 4, and it wasn't, No,
like I ended up liking a lot of players from that Detroit Colorado rivalry.
I
that
loved
was just
that
fun
Colorado.
to watch as a hockey fan.
I loved
as a
that
kid.
Colorado team, and I loved a lot of players on the team. Forsberger's right at the top, obviously.
I love Joe Sakic.
But I loved Joe Sakic. I loved Adam Foote. I loved Sandis Ozolich. And,
just realize how good Detroit was when you realize what Colorado had to put together to get over that hump.
And it's all thanks to NHL
and that's
98.
why the current playoff structure robs us of things like this. You need to be able to put the 2 best teams in a conference together to play for the chance to play for
in the conference final. Yeah,
in the conference final, you've got to be able to do that, because that was what you got with Detroit, Colorado all the time.
Because they were always 1-2. And you know what? And that transitions us really nicely, because we have another 1-2 matchup here.
Yeah.
On the right side of our bracket, Bernie Parent and Claude Giroux. I'm willing to guess that based on the fact that we just had a big long discussion, and the general consensus here seems to be that Claude Giroux hasn't quite reached that greatness peak yet. I assume both of you gentlemen are going with Mr. Bernie Parent. Is that safe to say?
I am. Yes, I am. And Parent's, to me, the only person who has any chance to beat Bobby Clarke. So for sure, he wins this matchup.
Okay, Kevin. Anything here?
I'm going with Bernie as well. I'll even crack a joke for you here that I filled out my bracket backwards to start, and I put the 2 1s just right into the final. Because,
right.
Yeah, that was too easy. And granted, from there, I don't know where I go. That's a tough choice.
That should go.
Let's just dive right into that, because
that should go 51-49. It really should.
Yeah,
I'm okay with walking past Claude here. So we'll jump straight into the finals. It's the Broad Street Bullies. It's the captain versus the goalie. It's Bobby Clarke and Bernie Parent. This is the question, right? Going back to all time. Who's your favorite Broad Street Bully? It's you can love Dave Schultz, you can whatever, but if you're talking about starting a team, it kind of comes down to Bobby Clarke.
What makes it so hard? What makes it so hard is for every, this would have never happened without this. There's no way they beat Boston if Parent doesn't post a 1-0 shutout, and if he's not the unbelievable goaltender that he is for those 2 years. If he doesn't get hurt in number 3 and injure the eye, they win 3 in a row. All of that Bernie stuff, yes, but they've never beaten Boston on the road, ever in Boston. If Bobby Clarke doesn't score the overtime goal in Game 2, they don't win that series.
Yeah.
So for every moment you have that there's no way without Bobby, there's no way without Bernie, the next one steps up and has a moment just as good. So
it comes down to a vote.
It's going to be really interesting.
When Mike, assuming these are the final 2, which obviously we don't know because our voters still have their say on Twitter at YWT Podcast. If these are the final 2, when the poll comes up, who are you clicking on?
Who am I clicking on? I'm going to give you both answers. Who am I clicking on? is Bobby Clark because I think he was ultimately the better player.
Okay.
Who do I think will win? Will be Bernie Parent. The city has a touch of bad taste from the GM, Bobby, and I think that's enough just to twitch it enough to put it in Bernie's favor, on top of the fact that this city just loves themselves some Bernie because he's just got such a personality. He's so much bigger than life. I think Bernie wins it. But I'm voting for Bobby.
Okay,
the
Kevin?
player.
Okay, I will start by saying I don't like, and I hope Mike agrees with me. I don't know that there's a wrong answer to this one because
100%
it's
I
so
agree.
close.
Yeah.
Correct.
I think we're all in agreement there.
I'm picking. If I had to pick, I'm picking Bernie, and here is why. And it's actually not the reasons
Did he
that
give
Mike
you a beer
gave it.
in
No, 'cause-
Margate?
no,
Good,
it has nothing to do with the G because I think you have to separate.
Totally
I'm
agree.
reading.
Yeah.
I'm reading all-time flyer as player. So even though I said,
Right.
when I said in the very beginning when I said Leclerc, Hextall, I thought that maybe votes would have been swayed by Hextall, the GM.
You did mention Bill Barber's coaching career.
I did, but I'm saying I think that if anybody needed a reference to who he was and to try to
Right.
learn a little bit more about the player, you
Right.
have a history.
He was relevant recently enough.
Right.
that
Like
they
I
should
feel
know.
like I feel like more people looked into Hextall's career as a player because he was the GM of the team too. You know,
I'm sure
that's all.
that's true.
So to go back to the actual decision between the two, I do think you separate Bobby Clark's GM career from his playing career, and I think he's definitely the all-time greatest flyer from a player perspective. The thing about Bernie that gives me the reason to pick him is that I think that if we talked about Lindros's potential, and we've talked about the way that Claude Giroux has put up numbers, and there's no telling that there's not another player who could come along and be 1,000-point guy, or somehow like the fact that Lindros could have been on track to pass Bobby Clark.
Mhm.
There's that potential. I don't think we're ever going to see individual seasons where goalies are putting up the numbers that Bernie Parent was ever again. I think that the league has shifted so much to the high-scoring side that those numbers are historical landmarks, and they'll never be replicated.
I think
And
that's
for that
entirely fair.
reason,
Yeah.
well, and not only that, but I think that at the end of the day, too, the real deciding factor for me, that was one of the big reasons. But the real deciding factor is in the two most important games where you win 2 Stanley Cups, he's a brick wall that doesn't allow anything.
Not one goal. Yep. He's
to me,
he's the Joe Montana, no interceptions in the Super Bowl of finals.
And to me, at the end of the day, Bobby Clark didn't have to be the guy who scored the goal to win the Stanley Cup. But Bernie Parent had to be the guy who told the other team, I go back, there's a great moment in the Broad Street Bullies documentary where Phil Esposito turns around and says that at some point in time, like at some point in time they realized some point in time you're not scoring on this guy. And Bobby Clark even says at some point in time, he goes, Bernie's not letting one in today. We got the one, and Bernie's not letting one in. We're going to win the Stanley Cup today. Holy crap.
You may have just swayed my vote.
Oh, you know what? I actually want to put my opinion in here too. Bernie Bobby. The thing that comes down to it for me is this. That third year, that third cup final, if their places are reversed, the Flyers probably win the Stanley Cup. If Bobby Clark's hurt and Bernie Parent's healthy, that team probably wins their third straight cup. Probably.
I'm going to disagree with that, but I don't think that hurts your premise.
Okay.
I don't think they get swept by Montreal.
I think they make that a much tougher series.
I agree with that. I just think Montreal was so good.
Montreal was a great team.
They weren't going to beat them without both of them. But there's no doubt in my mind if they have both of them, they win.
But no, I agree. But Bernie was so good.
Yeah.
For both years, just all three, just the whole. Ever since he came back from the WHA or however that whole happened.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. And this was in the era of smaller pads, smaller gloves, a whole lot
no
more
butterfly,
net to hit, whole lot more net to hit.
Yeah, and that's why I go back to the numbers of those seasons. You tell me a goalie in the league anymore who's going to play in 65, 70, pushing 75 games. Bernie played 73 games in that first cup year.
Yep.
Right.
And wins 47. His save percentage is .932, and his goals against was .189.
Yeah, it's sick.
You're never going to hear those numbers ever again because there's no team out there that's letting a goalie play more than 65 in a year anyway.
Right.
And then the other part of it is that I don't know of a goalie in the league today, on any level. Pick the best one out there. I don't know of any goalie in the league today who's going to be able to put up that kind of consistency over his starts.
I don't know if any goalie in the league could put up those numbers over 2 months. I don't know if any goalie in the league could put up those numbers over a 20-game sample.
So
Over 20 games, yes, but just know that like Carter Hart has actually put that kind of numbers, those kind of numbers together over 8.
Well, and that tells you how good he is, and that's why he deserves a spot on this list.
Well, I don't know about that yet. I still don't think he deserves a spot.
Listen, I'm trying.
I'm not sure, Kyle. I'm not sure you actually made your pick yet, though.
Yeah. What is your
Bernie?
pick? Oh, okay.
Bernie. Okay.
Because I think if he's healthy, they win that third cup.
Okay. I knew
And
that's where you were going, but I don't think you actually said it.
Whether they do or not, I'm willing to, hear arguments, obviously, but I think they get there. And 3 cups in a row, all of a sudden you're putting this team among, the greatest of all time. You're putting them not there, but they're in the conversation with that Oilers team. They're in the conversation.
Do you remember too? I mean, I'm just looking at it now. I'm going through. Bernie retired after he was 33 because of injury.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it was early. So the number.
Who knows? They could have won more.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. Again, the potential in numbers, and I do think that there's something to it about how.
And he was never the same after that injury.
But I do think there's something to it that he was an original Flyer and then wasn't for a couple of years and then comes back and is better than ever. And actually, at that point in time, is again the piece that's missing from everything. The piece that they have struggled to find for years and years and years is the goalie. Well, they finally bring him back in. Now he's elite, and that's what is the ticket to the cup wins. It has nothing necessarily to do with, Bobby Clark's a part of that team for his entire career. And Bobby Clark is the greatest player in this team's history, but the goalie turns out to be actually the greatest player.
Okay.
The goalie who wins you the 2 cups, to me, turns out to be the greatest Flyer of all time.
You may have swayed my vote.
So Senior is on the fence, but final answer. If the poll came out today, right this second, Mike puts the poll up on Twitter at YWT Podcast. Right this second, what button are you pressing? I'm putting you on the spot.
Bobby.
Yeah. Wow, he still picks Bobby Clark. All right, well.
Only because
there's no wrong answer.
Right, there's no wrong.
No, I absolutely agree with you.
And ultimately, I think he was greater longer, and that probably is what gives it to me.
Yep. And you know what? That's gonna wrap us up absolutely perfectly. You can find the rest of this poll on our Twitter at YWT Podcast. Make sure to thank Mike Jr. for doing this whole poll. He's done a fantastic job running it. He's over at Mike_Deletto. Mike Sr. is at Mike from S Jersey. He's been getting into Twitter fights all week. He's having fun in isolation. Kevin is at Kevin_Durso. You can also find him over at Flyerdelphia and in the Sports Talk Philly at Sports Talk Philly, sportstalkphilly.com, 97.3 ESPN. He's a media mogul. He's making radio hits every other day.
Not anymore.
No. Anything you gentlemen want to say before we get out of here?
No, I think this is a good place to wrap up.
I think it's good too. No, I got nothing much. I think it was this is good discussion. I can't wait to see what else we have to discuss later. After we get through this final 4 and we have to figure out something else to talk about next time.
I did see one thing before you wrap up, Kyle. I did see one thing on Twitter that I thought was a great question. If you could go back and watch any athlete, something to consider, guys, before we get back. If you could go back and watch the entire career of any athlete from beginning to end, who would you go back and watch?
Yeah, it's a great question.
Yeah.
Man, that is a good one. And you know what?
Save it.
Yeah, I think we're going to save it for 2 weeks from now.
Yep.
Full disclosure, we're recording this one on Zoom, so things were a little different. We're trying out the new fad. Let us know what you guys think. And until then, thank you for joining us on this isolation edition. We hope you and your family are staying safe and staying healthy and staying inside as often as humanly possible. And on that note, we will be back in 2 weeks in some form or fashion. We don't quite know who's here yet. Make sure to follow our Twitter and see how this poll ends. We'll definitely be talking about that. And on that note, guys, we'll see you later.